Hello comrades and welcome back to Ushanka Show. And the topic of today's video is vacation in the Soviet Union. But before we actually start talking about how the Soviet people like to spend their vacation time, we need to have a little refresher in geography. If you look at the map of the Soviet Union and United States and compare how the countries are located, you could tell there's a big difference about location. Pretty much Soviet Union and now Russia is in relation to United States, it's a Canada, it's just twice bigger in size. So I live in Southwest Michigan, and this is pretty much the northern part of United States, and we had a lot of jokes about Michiganders and our tough winters and a lot of snow and cold weather that we experience here in Mitten State. At the same time, if you draw the line, as I call the geography term, the parallel, so I live in the same location with the south part of the Crimean Peninsula. So the most southern part of Russia, it's where the almost northern part of the United States is. So no wonder that Soviet people wanted to go south for the vacation to get some sunshine, to get some hot weather, just like probably Canadians do. If you watch my channel, you probably know by now that I spend every summer up north in Ukraine, in the northern Ukraine, in the village with my grandparents. And it's Kiev about, I think, 45th parallel, so that's like a traverse city and upper peninsula area. And the climate's quite similar, so I remember the summers that I spent in the village, they were quite cold. I mean, we had some sunny, hot days, but most of the time will be mild weather, could be overcast, cloudy, it can be raining for a week or even longer. We call it cyclone, as it come over and it just covers this whole giant area, and you don't see sunshine for quite a long time. So my summers were quite cold, and I always had a habit of every time there will be some sunshine, I'll run outside trying to get some tan. And it took me a long time living here in Michigan to stop loving the sunshine that much, because there is just too much of the sunshine, hot weather here in Michigan. But first years in the summer, like every time there's sunny, I'm trying to be outside without a t-shirt to get some tan, because in Soviet Union, especially like in the area where I lived, sunshine was quite a rare thing in the summer. And actually, it's a little bit off the topic, but one of the reasons why Khrushchev failed was his corn initiative. And remember, if you watch the video about Khrushchev that I made, his nickname was Kukuruznik, the corn guy. It's because they tried to introduce the corn pretty much everywhere, but only in the southern part of Ukraine you can grow corn. In Chernihiv region, northern Ukraine, there wasn't just not enough of the season for the corn to get ripe and harvested. So the only way they were growing corn in the Chernihiv area is just for the food for the animals. So they'll cut it when it's not ready yet, and then store it in silos and then feed the cattle in the winter. But otherwise, corn wouldn't get ripe in that area. So this is why Soviet people wanted to go down south. They want to go to Crimea area. They want to go to the Black Sea shore to get some sunshine. Because if you look at the map of Soviet Union, you know, Ukraine is in the south, and then you go towards Moscow, towards St. Petersburg, and then Siberia. So most of the Ukraine territory of Soviet Union, it was like a far north of Canada. They had really cold summers and long and very, very cold winters. Well, I remember my parents always were taking vacation in the summer, and it was always the whole month, so 30-day paid vacation. So that sounds fantastic. But it's only in 1970, when the law was signed and accepted that Soviet workers should get at least 15 days of vacation per year. And then with every year that you work at the factory, when you build your so-called stage, then they add maybe another day. So my parents, by the end of 70s, beginning of 80s, they had whole 30 days of paid vacation. And the nice part was that they always get vacation pay up front. So for example, if you get in vacation in July, in the end of June, you get upfront pay the whole month ahead. You get that pay, so-called отпускные. So you have a vacation coming up and you have a money up front that you can spend while you're on vacation. But before 1970, it was quite a bit different. Actually, during the Stalin era, Soviet people, Soviet workers had only 6 days a year of paid vacation. And I believe they also work week was 6 days a week. They only had Sundays off. So there was more hardcore life during the Stalin regime. We were in this, turbo mode, building communism, and we didn't have time for chill. It's only later that we had a nice 30-day vacation and we can enjoy time off. Although not all people could enjoy even in 70s and 80s. For example, my distant relative in the village, the lady named Nila, I mentioned about her, my uncle drew a portrait of her. She was a doярка, so the lady who milks the cows, and they were milking by hand most of the time. I think it's only like after 80s they actually brought the machinery to milk the cows. She showed me her workbook, which is трудовая книжка, and she didn't have a single vacation all her life. All the time she worked for 30 or 40 some years, she never ever could take a vacation because she told me, well, cows don't take vacations, so I couldn't take vacation either. So what were the most popular places for Soviet people to go and spend their vacation time? Most of it will be the most popular destination was Crimea Peninsula. And generally people will say we're going south, ехать на юг or ехать на море. So vacation spent at the sea was considered the best vacation. And usually people will spend like 2 weeks, 10 days, and then they do other things around where they live, and they go to the villages to visit their parents if you came originally from the village. So Crimea, and generally Black Sea shore, Sochi, Batumi, Sukhumi in Krasnodar region. And some people like to go north, but not many. So along the Baltic Sea, in the Baltic republics, the popular destinations were like Yurmala. That was the place when people also go. But as I said, you go north, you're not getting a lot of sunshine and warm weather. And even right now, when I tell my friends back home in Ukraine or my viewers in Russia that we go up north for vacation, that's what we do here, they really shocked, because it doesn't make sense to them. Why would you go up north on your vacation? You're supposed to go down south like Florida or something, where the beaches and ocean. And I was like, man, it's too hot in Michigan in the summer. I don't want to go any more hot south where it's even hotter and more humid. And in fact, I know there's a lot of people from Florida come up north to Michigan to cool off and have a little vacation so you can be outdoors in the summer. If we look at Crimea, I mean, this is the beautiful destination. It's surrounded by the Black Sea. And actually the top location in Crimea was so-called UBK. It's a Южный берег Крыма, so southern shore of the Crimea was most sought for location. Although beaches there were not that great because it was quite rocky, but it was really picturesque. It's beautiful places you can explore. You can hike mountains. There are the caves, and the most popular towns, like resort towns in southern part of Crimea, were Yalta and also Alushta. On the other part, Yevpatoria, another popular destination, I was there once when I was like 6 years old, and I'm gonna make a separate video about my experiences being on vacation on the Black Sea. But that one had the best sand beaches in the whole area, but it was quite flat and boring. So besides spending all day on the beach, on the sand, there was not much things to do in Yevpatoria. Other popular destinations for the Soviet people were on the Black Sea shores were Gagra in Abkhazia Republic, and also Pitsunda, which is located pretty close to Gagra. That was hard to go there because it was very popular with Soviet elites, so like Communist Party leaders and other people with connections with so-called blood. I'm gonna talk about that later. They prefer that. It's really nice location because there are mountains along the shore. They protect the beaches from the wind, so it's a really nice and dry and warm air. And around 500,000 people were going to that location in Gagra and Pitsunda every season. The next popular destination will be in Krasnodar region along the Black Sea again, Chorное море. That's the most popular place to go. Of Sochi, you're probably familiar with Sochi now after we had a Winter Olympics. Anapa and Gelendzhik. So those were also popular towns and destinations for vacation for Soviet people. In the northern part, I already mentioned Yurmala on the Baltic Sea and Palanga. Those are like Soviet artists preferred those locations for the summer, or maybe they had a dacha summer home. So as I said, those areas weren't hot, so I kind of see if you're an artist and you want to relax and maybe work on some projects. Hot weather doesn't really help working on art, so cold, calm weather and sea will be more preferable. So Yurmala and Palanga were popular destinations. I actually visited Yurmala once, long time ago. I believe it was 1987. We went to Riga in Latvia as an exchange program. So the school kids from Riga came to Kiev and stayed in our school, and we went to Riga and stayed at their school. We slept on the cots right in school, and then we toured around, and we took a train, local train, and we visited Yurmala. It was quite a cute town. I liked it a lot. So Yurmala and Palanga on the Baltic Sea was a popular destination, also around 500,000 visitors every season. In Ukraine, popular destination was Truskavets in the western Ukraine. It was called Soviet Baden-Baden. Truskavets famous for its mineral waters. So those places were mostly for people who were looking to improve their health. So they had like health spas when people stay and take different, medical treatments and drink mineral waters. Similar location was in Georgia, in Georgia, called Barjomi. And that's also the name of the popular mineral water. Everywhere you could buy Barjomi mineral waters. So those were more destinations for people with health problems. So how did the Soviet people travel to vacation spots? Well, first of all, you could fly by the only airline available in Soviet Union, Aeroflot. And I covered traveling by air quite in detail in my video number 39. So if you're interested to get more information about traveling by Aeroflot in Soviet Union, please check my video number 39. The next way, and it was the most popular way of getting to vacation spots, was by train. Once again, I covered in a really detailed manner topic of traveling by train in Soviet Union in my video number 38. So we'll touch a little bit here, but if you want more details, please check my video number 38, Life in USSR number 38, Traveling by Train in Soviet Union. Another way, you could go by bus, but you only could do the bus if you don't live too far away from vacation spots, like from Crimea, because I don't believe we had overnight bus trips. They're only day trips, so we didn't have like a Greyhound that covers huge distances. Bus was more like semi-local service. But if you're interested about that topic, my video number 37 covers the public transportation and the bus. So 37 is about traveling by bus, video number 38 traveling by train, and video number 39 is traveling by air. And of course, if you were a lucky guy and had your own car in Soviet Union, you could travel by car. So this is the way the Soviet people could get to their destinations. And here we'll stop for now, and my next video will get more into details about a little bit about traveling, and then we'll look at the vacation spots and all the interesting details, how people spend their time at the beach. And as always, don't forget to share my video, and if you like the video, don't forget to put the like. Soviet Vacation Part 2. Today we'll talk some more about how the Soviet people spend their vacation time, but in the beginning, let's do a little refresher and look again at the most favorite destinations for Soviet people to spend their summer days. It's a Crimean Peninsula and the cities or small towns located along the Black Sea shore. Yalta. Alushta. Yevpatoria. Sochi. Anapa. Gagra. Yurmala, located on the Baltic Sea. Truskovets in Ukraine. Borjomi in Georgia. So looking at all these towns, you probably understand that this Black Sea was popular as a place for vacation even before the Soviet Union existed, and the rich people of the Russia had their summer homes or summer palaces built on the most beautiful locations along the Black Sea. Of course, after the Socialist Revolution of October 1917, all those places were confiscated, nationalized, and turned into different places to rest for the regular workers. Even the famous Livada Russian Tsar Palace was turned into so-called peasants' sanatorium. And only in 1928 there started construction of buildings for specific sanatoriums, they call it, for places for the Soviet workers and peasants to take a break and spend their vacation days. So we had several types of, I can call it maybe institution, that people could visit and stay. And I don't know how to translate exactly these words into English, but one kind was called sanatorium, so it's probably from Latin sanatorium, maybe. So there was the places for your health recovery. So besides taking vacation, you also take some different medical treatments. So those places were really popular with workers who had some like coal miners, or you work at the steel mill. So it's bad for your health as a benefit of working, because you work in such an environment. The government provides you with these sanatoriums where you can take mud baths, special inhalation treatments for your lungs. Then you can have massages, different exercises. Then the doctors will be checking you out. Different special showers. There's a shower called dush sharkos, a special, probably like a massage type showers. And then there's a different diets available in stolovaya, a place, cafeterias. So that's the type called sanatorium. So that's the people visit who need to recover their health due to their work environment. Another place was called pensionat. So that was similar to sanatorium, but it has less strict medical environment, so that people still, so that's mostly for healthy people. And then they provide you with 3 meals a day. You have some entertainment going on, but there may be some medical things going, maybe like massages, stuff like that. The next one was interesting, called Dom Отдыха, which you can translate like the house of rest. So almost sound to me like a funeral home, but it's not that type of rest. So you just come and relax. So the house of relaxation. So same, you just kind of go to the beach. You have a cafeteria when you can eat 3 times a day. So it's not like all inclusive, all you can eat. It's only 3 times a day. And of course, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then maybe there'll be some kind of dances in the evening. So this is the place I visited once with my parents. So that's a Dom Отдыха, the place of rest. Then we had so-called Turbaza, which is a tourist base. And that was the basic, small, like A-frame time homes without any conveniences. Then you had outhouses maybe, and public showers. And that's for the people who wanted just to visit some locations on a cheap. You cook outside for yourself. You had some kind of grill and stuff like that. So that'll be Turbaza. That was the least expensive way to go somewhere down south and take a break. Most of these places, sanatoriums, tourist bases, places of rest, were constructed, built, and they're owned by the different departments. Like coal miners will have something, taxi drivers, and so on. So you need to work in that industry, and then you might be able to go and stay at the places that belong to that specific ministry of transportation or whatever. So that's what all along the shore we had a bunch of those different places of rest and so on. And of course we had hotels and motels, but this is this classic Soviet Union situation. They were always booked. You couldn't just travel down south and stop at the hotel. They will be all booked. You needed to have connections in order to get a room there. So that I never heard anyone about going down south and just staying in a hotel for a week or so. Well, if you watch my videos for a while and you're familiar with my stories, you probably got this idea. So as the thin red line through all my videos, goes the topic of shortage of different things. You couldn't just go and purchase a car. You couldn't just go and purchase furniture most of the time. A lot of foodstuffs, you couldn't just walk in the store and buy some fish or meat. So Same situation with the vacation. You couldn't just say, okay, I would like to go with my family this summer down to Crimea. You needed to get Puchovka. And this is the word that you need to remember if you want to know something about Soviet vacation. Soviet vacation, which is the word отпуск, it was always with Puchovka. And I can't translate this word in English really well, but this is like you purchase a package. It might be included a trip, usually on a train, and then you stay in one of those places of rest, Dom отдыха or sanatorium, and for 10 days or 14 days, meals included. But you need to buy this Puchovka, and we never said I bought a Puchovka. You always said I got a Puchovka. So you need to get it somehow. And there were different ways you can get your Puchovka. So the cost of Puchovka was fixed. Of course, it's a government controlled prices. And since 1960s all the way in the 80s, the price was pretty set. So if you go with family of 3 and you stay in a номер, so they just call like you rent a room, and with 3 meals 3 times per day, it will cost you for 12 days about 60 rubles for family of 3. Or if you go for a whole month, for 24 days, it will cost you 120 rubles. So that's a lot of money. It's pretty much what the average person was earning in a month. So if you make $5,000, let's say here in the United States, you're paying $5,000 to stay for a month somewhere with 3 meals per day, and really nothing else besides you can go to the beach and then there'll be some kind of dances, entertainment in the evening. But most of these Puchovkas, they're called профсоюзная Puchovka, so that's the labor union Puchovka, and usually labor union will pay like most of the cost, and the worker pays only 30%. So you will be pretty good. You can pay about 20 rubles, and you have a nice little vacation by the sea. But as I always mentioned, there was shortage of Puchovkas since there was no market pricing, demand and supply. You had a fixed supply, and you have fixed prices, and demand is high. So then what you get shortage. So pretty much the whole system worked on so-called распределение, or if you can translate it to like distribution. So your ministry, for example, we'll say of coal miners, right? They send down to this coal mine. You have 10 Puchovkas, and you have maybe 500 coal miners or whatever. So then there's maybe a waiting list. So like the people who went before, they go back to the bottom of the list, and people who didn't go for a while, they'll be on the top of the list. And then you get, again, you don't buy, you get your Puchovka. Or maybe if you have connections, people, or, if you have access to Puchovkas and you want to make sure the guy who has access to refrigerators is happy, so you bypass other people and you get him Puchovka, then they will bypass the waiting list and will get your refrigerator. So that's how it works too. So party leaders, management, they had the first dibs at the Puchovkas, and then of course we had a special categories of people that who were seriously sick, veterans of World War II, people with many kids. They also had be kind of head of the waiting list to get a Puchovka. My family, we had only once Puchovka, and it wasn't even to the Black Sea, which was like a premium destination, I said, Crimean Peninsula. We end up going to the Sea of Azov, or as we call it, Azovskaya More, and that's where we stayed in the place of rest for, I believe it was 12 days or 14 days. I think it was 12 days. So my dad, it was his turn or his chance. They offered him Puchovka. So for all these years, and we went there only once. We got the Puchovka through my dad's place of work, and I was 15 at that time. And I hope I can find some pictures to show, but it's all, of course, black and white. And we didn't really like it because all you do all day is just spend it on the beach. You know, you wake up in the morning, you go to the cafeteria, you have breakfast, you go to the beach. Then you have lunch, you take a little break, you go back to the beach. There was really nothing else to do. You don't have a car, you don't have a bike. It's only like walking distance. Maybe you can walk to the town, which, you know, about 20-30 minutes walk. You can buy some strawberries or some sweet cherries. And then again, for all day, all you can do is just swim and get tan. And in the evening, then you have some dances. And then we have a movie theater that you can walk. It was like open movie theater. Had no roof, kind of summer theater, so you can watch some movies. So we stayed there for 12 days and none of us really liked it. It gets old really quick, and we prefer to go to the village and up north and do mushroom picking and fishing and stuff like that. And as I started mentioning about my Puchovka trip to the sea, there is a kind of funny story I want to share with you, and that will be the end of this video. So as I mentioned, I was 15, and I guess my dad started having concerns about my sexuality because I was a really nerdy, really shy, and at the age of 15 I never had a girlfriend. So my dad started kind of being suspicious of maybe I'm not really interested in girls. And so when we went down south to the Sea of Azov, one time at cafeteria we had a meal, and the people who work at cafeterias, there were students, college students who were studying to be cooks or work as waitresses. So there were several really young, pretty girls, maybe a little bit older than me because they went to college. I was still 15. So there were one girl. She was just so pretty, and of course she spent all already like over a month at the beach. So she would cook, serve food, and then the rest of the time they just go to the beach and hang out, swim, and get tan. So she had really beautiful dark tan, and I saw her a couple of times on the beach in her bikinis. So man, I had a horrible crush on her. So that one time we were having food and she brought meal. I don't remember what she brought food to us at the table, and my dad caught my eye. He noticed how I looked at her and he was so excited. Right there at the table, he announced like, "Oh yeah, I see that you like her so much. Do you like her?" And I was so embarrassed because she was standing right there grinning because, you know, she was older. And I just turned red because I got caught. But my father was so happy when he realized that his son is not gay. Well, that's the end of the Soviet vacation part 2. We have a couple more videos about it. I hope you enjoyed this story. And as always, don't forget to like my videos. And I would like to especially thank the viewers that posted comments in my community tab. I posted somebody else comment about how boring my videos are and have no focus and they're too long. And I had a lot of support, so thank you guys so much. Well, be ready for another long and boring video about life in Soviet Union. Today is a Soviet vacation part 3. Today we'll talk about how people use the train to go south, to go down to the Black Sea for the summer vacation. I already covered traveling by train quite extensively in my video number 38. So if you want to get more details about traveling by train in Soviet Union, please check it out my video number 38, which is Life in USSR number 38. Some of my viewers commented that it'll be great to interview some other comrades, people who lived in Soviet Union or still live over there on that side of the pond, and get their perspective about life in the USSR. And in fact, I already done it several times. I asked people to write some memories about things, and then I presented my videos. So most of my videos is actually a combination of my memories and also recollections of other people. So today's story is actually from my friend Vitaly from Kiev. We're about same age, and his family in fact traveled down to Black Sea way more often. In total they traveled 17 times during the Soviet Union and after, so he has way more memories about having a vacation at the Black Sea, and today I will read his story about traveling by train. The reason why train was the most popular way of transportation in the Soviet Union is airplanes were quite expensive. Generally, flying from Kiev to some Black Sea destination would be twice as much as traveling by train. So only people who earned a lot of money, like for example taxi drivers or restaurant waiters, those people could afford to travel by airplane, or of course party leaders or some management. Regular workers, it was quite pricey for them to fly, so most people took a train. And of course you can sleep pretty decently on a train because you had beds. You couldn't do it on the bus, so train was the most popular means of traveling for the long distances. We used to have 3 levels of train cars, like say levels or types. The most comfortable was so-called SV, spalny wagon, so you can translate like a sleep car. It had only like a small compartments with a door, like small rooms for 2 people. So each compartment contained room for only 2 people. So it was way less crowded. And of course, it was way more expensive. Next one was so-called coupe. And that one you had small compartments for 4 people. So 2 people were sleeping on like a ground floor, and upper bunks, there's 2 other guys. And of course, you can close the door, kind of block yourself from the traffic in a corridor. And the most popular and most common was so-called Platzkart. And as I said, I already covered those topics, but that's when we have, it pretty much was wide open, and you had people in the small compartments on one side, where you have space for 4 people to sit and sleep, and 2 more people will sit by the window right in a walkway. And that was the worst spot to be. Well, the worst will be on the side by the bathrooms, by the toilet. So that will be the closest to the toilet. It'll be the stinkiest, the noisiest, because there's a foot traffic, and day and night people going to use the bathroom. And of course, as longer you travel, as smellier it becomes to sit right there by the toilet. Not by the toilet, like by the bathroom, but we just call it toilet. So by the toilet. As Vitaly mentioned, since you travel down south in the summer, so he said when you travel coupe or Platzkart, there was always really hot in the cars and very stuffy, because there was no air conditioning really going on. And the only way you can get fresh air if you manage to open the window in your compartment, and quite often those windows were jammed shut, so you couldn't even open them, or you couldn't even close them. And I believe sometimes the people, it's like each train car had a person in charge, provodnik or provodnitsa, so male or female, and they will jam those windows on purpose, because if you keep windows open, it brings the dirt inside, so it means there's more cleaning to do for them. So they will purposely jam those small sliding windows, and they prefer people to be suffocating, but at least they have less work of cleaning. He recalls that most of his travels there always had old Soviet-made train cars. Really seldom there'll be a new train car. We used some made in Germany, Eastern Germany, of course, DDR. So those were nicer ones, but most of the time he said trains in Ukraine going from Kiev down south were older ones in a pretty crappy condition. Food-wise, each train had so-called wagon restaurant, so there was like a restaurant, like a cafeteria on wheels, but not many people used it because it's pretty expensive. So if you travel, for example, from Kiev to Crimean Peninsula, it takes you a day and a half, so you live around sometimes in the evening and afternoon Kiev, and then you sleep on a train, and then you arrive sometimes, so about 24-hour train trip. So people will bring their own food. I do not recall any coolers, like food coolers, available for purchase back in the Soviet Union. Here I see people using them all the time, plastic coolers or old-fashioned metal coolers to put your food. And we had thermoses so you could keep your drinks hot, but we never had actual coolers. So if you bring food with you on a train, you bring something that doesn't get spoiled quick. The most popular type of food snacks was hard-boiled eggs, maybe some grilled chicken, and then some kind of like a salami type kielbasa, salami, so that doesn't get spoiled. Then of course you bring some fresh cucumbers or tomatoes, and always we like to eat tomatoes or cucumbers, just you cut them in pieces, then you put some salt on it, and that's how I eat it. So the most popular way of bringing salt would be you put some in your matchbox. So Soviet matches were in these little convenient matchboxes, and that's what people use to bring salt or sugar. And then of course you bring some like sweet candy, some water, some mineral water, and along the train, when the train stops at the different train stations, you can jump out and purchase some. There'll be some old ladies selling maybe beer, or maybe some dry fish and other snacks, maybe some apples depending on the season, and some homemade bakery. So that's how people would usually snack on the way to the Black Sea, or generally traveling on a train. Just basic homemade food, nothing fancy. And of course you have to mention that when you're on a train, you always order tea. Pretty much every train car will have a boiler, and they had this interesting kind of tea cups on the trains with the logo of the Soviet railroad stations, and you can purchase tea from a provodnik. And that's kind of your way you spend your time sipping tea and looking out the window and talking to your neighbors in your compartment. And I remember that tea quite well because, it's a glass cup inside of the metal holder. So when the train is moving and your cup is empty, it always makes that interesting metal, noise metal on the glass on the metal. So that noise was always remind me of traveling by train, because when you go to bed and people have empty cups sitting on the table, they all make it in din-de-lin, din-de-lin. It wasn't a Christmas noise, but this is the empty teacups on a train sound. It was very important when you arrive, come to the train station, that you occupy your place as quick as possible. So there'll be people line up waiting on the platform. Then, when the train pulls in, you try to get in as quick as possible and claim your place according to your ticket. So your ticket will tell you which number of your place, and it's an upper bunk or a lower bunk. The reason why, because quite often they'll sell so-called doubles. So you have a twin, so you might have two tickets for the same spot, and then you have a problem. So usually the rule is whoever takes that spot first, that the person occupies it, and then there'll be a job of the train employees, workers to find, train staff to find the spots for the extra people. I'm not sure why that was happening. Maybe people were making extra cash, or maybe just a sincere mistake, but Vitaly mentioned, so quite often you could have two people on the same spot, sometimes even three. And since on every train they had empty seats for so-called just in case, so if some like military need or some other needs, so they'll keep some spots empty, unoccupied to the last minute, and only then they'll sell tickets, or there'll be the places that those twins in parentheses will occupy. So provodnik, your train car staff person will check your tickets when you climb into the train car. Then after train moves start going, he will check tickets again, and then he will ask you, would you like to purchase a bedding? The cost of bedding was 1 ruble, and some people didn't want to waste their money, so they'll refuse. So an interesting situation, bedding usually will be washed, but sometimes will be damp, according to Vitaly. And on the third level, up high, there'll be mattresses that you're supposed to unroll, and then you lay your bed in. And the rule was that if you don't purchase bedding, you're not allowed to use those mattresses. And those mattresses were quite nasty, because they didn't look like they were ever washed. So because, why do you need to wash the mattress? Because people put, bedding over it. And some people, they'll try in the middle of the night when a provodnik is asleep to actually bring the mattress down and sleep right on the mattress. Of course, that makes it dirty because you don't have sheets on the top. Also, Vitaly mentioned that if you experienced a traveler by train, you knew that you need to bring a wet rug with you. So you wipe off clean the table and the shelves, because usually they'll have a thin layer of dirt and dust. So it sounds like provodnik people didn't really bother of doing deep cleaning. And then you bring some old newspapers with you, and they go on the floor. So the bottom bunk you can open up, and that's where you store your luggage. Plus, you can also put your luggage on a third shelf way up high. So you don't want to have your bags dirty, so you bring your old newspapers with you, and you lay them down on the floor in the luggage compartment. Then you can put your bags, and that's how you make sure they stay clean. And bathrooms, of course, Soviet train bathroom was something else. And actually, some of my viewers commented that a similar things was practiced in Scotland for many years. That you just go use the bathroom, and when you flush the toilet, the bottom opens up and your piss or your crap just falls out right on the railroad tracks, and then it closes. So I remember train bathrooms were always nasty, smelly, disgusting, and it was the worst thing you can imagine if you need to go number 2, because you'll be missing the lid, the seat part, where you sit, or it'll be so disgusting. So a lot of people would just climb right on the toilet, and they squat sitting on the toilet. So, you climb on the toilet, you squat over it, and that's how you go number 2. Of course, you need to bring your own toilet paper, because they wouldn't provide that. So that was always my bad memories, is you hated to go use in the bathroom. And you try to time yourself that if you need to go number 2, you just like, okay, we have a 15 minutes stop at the train station. I better race and use bathrooms over there at the train station. I'll go, they probably be pretty dirty too, but at least they don't shake. So there's no reason I can fall and get myself dirty. No hot water was available in the bathrooms, only cold water. And of course, if you train full of kids, and as long as the trip is, then the worst and worst smell will be in the train bathroom, and sounds like they didn't want to clean really well. So yeah, that was one of the worst memories. Is like if you get a spot by the bathroom on the side, it was the worst. And of course, while you're traveling down south, you need to be really watching because people who steal money, or thieves, criminals, they know that if people go down south, they bring cash with them. They are so-called отпускные, their vacation pay. So when you sleep, you want to make sure that, you have your money hidden somewhere that's not easy to get, stuff like that, because it was quite often that people will wake up and money are missing. So as I said, seasoned train travelers, they would go and purchase ticket maybe like a month in advance, and even earlier. And you will want to buy a ticket in the middle of the car, so it's further as possible away from the bathroom, and preferably in the beginning of the train, because as closer you to the beginning of the train, as less rocking going on, and the last cars in the train, they shake the most. So this is kind of like you wondering about, okay, can I buy the ticket? Is it decent? And of course, if you came late and you're desperate, then you buy whatever is available. And Vitaly mentioned that a flight like coupe, which was more expensive, was twice cheaper, and a Platz card was 3 times cheaper than going from Kiev to Simferopol versus flying from Kiev to Adler. So there was quite a price difference. So people were willing to sacrifice their time and comfort in order to save money. Okay, so this is a conclusion of my Soviet vacation, part 3 series of videos about Soviet people, how they spend free time in the summer. I hope you enjoyed the show. As always, please don't forget to put like under this video. It helps to promote it so more people can see it and learn about life in Soviet Union. Well, today we're gonna have another long and boring video about life in Soviet Union. We continue our conversation about vacation in the USSR, and today is a part 4, traveling and having vacation the wild style. That's an interesting expression that was used in Soviet Union, путешествовать дикарями. So I would translate it as wildlings. So you go and you spend your vacation as a wildling. So what does it mean? We talked already about Puchovka, and I want to repeat again because it seems that some people misunderstood me. Puchovka is not a permission to travel, not a permission to go for vacation. Puchovka is like when you purchase 7-day stay in a hotel down in Mexico. So that package, you stay in a hotel, you get food and other things. This is what we use the word Puchovka. So when you purchase Puchovka in Soviet Union, then you can stay, for example, down at the Black Sea at some sanatorium spa for 21 days or 14 days, and you pay, 60 rubles or whatever. So that's the Puchovka. So that's your vacation package, I would say. So it's not a permission to travel. You don't need to buy Puchovka to go to Moscow. It's a question I got quite often. Did you need to get a permission to travel to other city? Generally, no. In Soviet Union, you didn't need a permission to travel to Moscow or visit St. Petersburg, or at that time Leningrad. Exception was like so-called closed cities like Sevastopol and some towns and cities in Siberia. When they had a big military production, then it was so-called closed city, and that one you couldn't just go and visit. You need to get a permission to get into the city because they tried to limit spies entering those cities. Otherwise it was pretty much free travel across the Soviet Union. So Puchovka is not permission to go on vacation. It's just your travel package to stay at some specific spa for a certain amount of days and getting, benefits of staying there, like free beach access, free food, some free medical treatments. And as I said earlier, not everyone could get Puchovka. There were quite a short supply. A lot of people wanted to go on a nice vacation, to stay at a nice place. And pretty much almost everyone wanted to go down south to the Black Sea because that was the only destination in the Soviet Union when you can get a lot of sun and nice warm water to swim. So there was a shortage of Puchovkas, and a lot of people still wanted to go down south. So they went as a wildlings, dikaryami. So we will talk today about that style of spending your vacation as a wildling. Как дикарь. So there are several ways you can travel as a wildling. The most popular was you buy tickets for a train, you arrive to Crimean Peninsula, then you rent from private people a room, or even people rented quite often just a cot. So there'll be, for example, like 5 or 6 beds in a single room, and you just rent one bed. It's literally like a cot to sleep on, and this is what you have, and then you just go on your own. You find a beach to swim, you find some food. So renting the private sector in the villages or towns along the Black Sea shore, that was a first kind of traveling as a wildling. Second type was a more hardcore. You pretty much get your backpacks, get your own tent, and then you just, again, you take a train down to Crimea. That was the most popular destination, if you should know by now. And then you just hike or take a bus, and you find some nice location by the Black Sea shore, and you set up your tent, and then you just live in a tent, and you spend several days or a week camping literally by the shore. You need to remember, we're talking about Soviet Union, so we literally had no private property. Everything was government owned, so people could camp pretty much anywhere, except maybe like national parks, stuff like that. Otherwise, I never ever seen in my life this silly signs like I see here in America everywhere. Private property, no trespassing, no hunting, no camping. That was totally unheard of. Anytime you just go and set up your tent at some nice location, and it's totally cool. So this is how people would camp as a wildlands in Crimea. You just try to find some good spot, and of course close to the beach and not too far away from some town or the village, so you can purchase food and get water. And if you're one of those rare lucky people who had a car, then if you also even more lucky and you can buy a travel camper. They were manufacturing small campers, more like a pop-up style campers to pull behind a car, and one of them called Turist. Another brand was called Skiff, and it was a really unusual one called Dawn. It wasn't mainly produced, and now they're like in really high demand. A lot of people would like to buy it as the vintage item. There was a camper called Dawn, and it was a camper, tent, and a boat in one. So also people can just drive the car down to Crimea, find a good spot, and set up their camper. But as I said, not many people had cars in the Soviet Union. Even less people had campers or could afford to go down and camp like that. So there was the 3 ways you can travel and spend your vacation as a wildland. Renting in the private sector, camping in your own tent, or camping with your travel camper. The other small details which I think you might find interesting about vacation in Soviet Union, besides, no private properties, is I don't recall that you could purchase any kind of sunblock. There was just none. I remember first time I discovered it in 1995 when I came to America first time to work in a summer camp. That's when I noticed when I went to the beach on Lake Michigan, there was this interesting sweet smell in the air, and I couldn't figure out what the heck is going on. Why does it smell so good? And then I noticed there was one lady was putting a bunch of this white cream lotion on her kid. So I asked my friends, like, hey, what's going on? There's like, well, she's applying sunblock. And this is how I learned that there's a cool stuff that can prevent you from sunburn called sunblock. Although, to think about it, why would you go on the beach and put sunblock when you go to the beach to actually get tan? So when people arrive to Crimea from Moscow or other northern territories, especially from Siberia, they'll be all white. And this first thing happens to you when you arrive to Crimea. After first or second day, you'll be bright red. And we had this expression, he is as red as the boiled crawfish. Krasny как вареный рак. Because it literally how the people would look, they'll be bright red, all burned up from not having at all sun back home and now arriving to Crimea where it's really sunny and no sunblock available. So you could tell that people just arrived for vacation because they'll be bright red as the boiled crawfish. And another small detail about Crimea in particular, there was always problems with water. That's a really dry area. There's really not many natural resources of water. They actually had to build a channel to transfer water from Dnieper River going to Crimea. Otherwise, you need to find some spot that you can go and get some water in town, or maybe where there's some kind of creek or something, which was hardly anything. So Crimea was always and still having horrible shortage of water, and quite often that, like, if you live in a city in Crimea, there'll be no water, especially in the summer when there's a lot of people arrive as tourists, so the high demand for water. And during the day, they shut off all the water going to the private sectors or any buildings that people live. And only at night, then you might get some water, and people will try to fill any container they have so they can have some water for the next day. So there's another kind of interesting detail about spending summer in the Crimea. There's a constant shortage of fresh water. For those viewers who like to watch Soviet movies, there are several movies that kind of show a little bit camping, spending vacation as a wildland in the USSR. First movie called 3+2, 3+2. I might seen it a long time ago. I completely don't recall anything about that movie. The second movie is Sportlato 82. We already talked about that movie, but that's the movie. If you want to see the Soviet train, you'll see that. And it's the people traveling on the train to the vacation spot. And they travel as a wildland, some of them. So Sportlato 82, that's another movie you want to watch to see how they camp that way. The third movie is Будьте моим мужем, Be My Husband. I don't think I've seen that one, or if I did, I don't remember. And the last one is Прощание славянки. I don't know how to translate that correctly. Slavyanka is the Slavic woman, and it's like Slavic woman saying goodbye. You can translate that way. So Прощание славянки. So there are 4 movies. You might want to check it out. We'll put the links below this video so you can check it out and enjoy those movies. Okay, so now we will talk shortly about different ways you travel as a wildlands or you stay down in Crimea as a wildlands. As I mentioned, people would just arrive to Crimea. For example, main stop was Simferopol. That's what the main train stop. All the trains go from Russia or Ukraine. They usually go up to Simferopol. And right there at the train station, there will be people. Some of them were owners. Some of them will be like almost like agents standing there with maybe the signs, and that's what looking for people who want to rent. So here is an interesting detail. You know, like this whole Soviet society and socialism is pretty much its refusal of market forces. Like, we don't believe that market forces and competition, all the stuff is good. We're gonna have planned economy. We're gonna decide what needs to be done. At the same time, you know, people are people. So if there is a demand for housing, for vacation, there'll be people who'd provide that housing. So that was really like kind of, I wouldn't say it's illegal, but wasn't like a official business for people, but it was like everyone knew it's going on. But since there was such a shortage of spas and places of rest, government was kind of like ignoring this whole situation with people renting out their houses for other people who would like to spend this nice summertime on the shores of the Black Sea. Of course, other option will be any taxi driver in Crimea would know people who rent. And of course, they probably get some kickback for referring people. Or if you're not too lazy and you're trying to get the cheapest, the lowest price, you just travel all the way to the shore and you just walk along and you knock on the door and ask if you have anything for rent. And you can rent, if you have a whole family, you can rent a room. And in the 80s, price to rent a room was 5 rubles per day. And I was trying to kind of compare prices so people can have a better idea of the cost. And I came up that 1 ruble and $1 with the salaries. So pretty much it's between times 10 times 20. So you're paying, would say, about $50 to $100, and it's just basic room. There's nothing with the room, no bathrooms, no shit. Just there's a room, maybe has a couple beds, and you're paying $50 a day to stay there. And remember, like if say 5 rubles, people were making average 130, 150 rubles a month. So if you pay 5 rubles a day and you stay for 20 days, it's your monthly salary going just to rent a room without any conveniences. Sometimes you can get a discount if you stay for a long time. So for 2 weeks, you can get maybe a deal between 70 to 100 rubles. And of course, you know, it's just like everywhere else, it's all location, location, location. So places that located really close to the beach, they will ask premium, higher prices. And if it's somewhere middle of nowhere and you have to walk for half an hour to the beach, then of course prices will be lower. And since there was such a high demand, people, as I mentioned earlier, were renting also beds, like cots. So you pay 1 ruble per day just to rent a bed. And, you know, they'll have some kind of separations with the hanging blankets or something between the beds. But if you don't have money, or just want to do as cheap as possible, then you pay per just for cod to sleep on. This just a sleeping spot, pretty much. That's what it. And of course, the local people, they try to maximize the income because they could make insane amount of money during the summer. So they would rent every single room. They will rent outbuildings. So if they have like a little barn, or they will build a little barn, separate that in a couple of rooms, and rent everything possible. Quite often people would move out, stay with friends, and just kind of supervise their house and have everything rented out, because they literally could make, 500 rubles per month or even more renting their property to people who came to spend vacation. So there was a good income for locals. And of course, there was no conveniences, like it's not a hotel. So most of the time, it will be just outhouse for the bathroom. And they maybe have a so-called summer shower. So there'll be black barrel filled with water staying, kind of up high. And then you have a hose. So then you need to wait till the sun warms up the water, and then you take a shower. And of course, remember, I told you, since Crimea had shortage of water, quite often there'll be no water. So you need to figure out how to wash yourself, find some public showers by the beach or something like that. A friend of mine, Vitaly, that I told you in the previous video, they traveled with his family about 17 times down to the Black Sea. He says that quite often, if people allow you to use their summer shower, they do, quick wash, and then once a week they will go and use public so-called banyas or saunas. And that's where they really scrub themselves and wash themselves. Otherwise, it will be pretty challenging to stay clean. But, you're swimming in the sea every day, so it's somewhat you wash and disinfect. Then for cooking, people may let you use their own kitchen. Otherwise, during the day, people would just go and eat at stolovaya. Now, stolovaya, it's not like a fast food. We'll show you some pictures. And of course, there'll be huge lines. Food wouldn't be that expensive, but some people say it was good. Some people said it wasn't that good, but that was the only way. There was no fast food available, no cafeteria. So pretty much most of the time it's just you go to stolovaya, stay in line, you buy some mashed potatoes and cutlet and some compote, and as your food. I don't recall, I think I mentioned already, I went once with my mother. We went to the Black Sea to Yevpatoria as a wildlings, and same thing as I mentioned, we rented a room, but there were no souvenir shops, no t-shirts to buy. But there were some people who were making money since, there's a lot of people on the beach. So there'll be people walking around and selling boiled corn. So towards the August, September, there'll be someone wandering around with the bucket, and they offer boiled corn and some salt you can buy. Another stuff you can buy would be cotton candy. That's a famous thing. It's the only spot you could buy cotton candy. I couldn't ever see it for sale in the regular grocery stores, but there'll be people who make that privately at home, and they walk around the beach and offer cotton candy, or we call it sakharnaya vata, for sale. So there were some entrepreneurs even during the Soviet Union who tried to make some money. And of course, you can buy ice cream. And I remember we bought some grilled chicken as one of the best meals I had. I remember at the beach was having grilled chicken. And you can imagine that the whole country comes for the summer vacation to Crimea. It was extremely crowded place. All the beaches were packed full. I mean, there's photos out there that, if you come not a little bit later, you're having a hard time to find a spot just to lay down. So it pretty much looked like, those penguins colonies down south at the South Pole. That's how the beaches were looked at the Black Sea. And so only people who spend vacation as a wildlings, the extreme style, so the ones with the tent, they will hike away from the popular locations, away from the public beaches, and then maybe they'll also call wild beach, so that was not maintained, but there will be hardly any people. So that's the other guys who preferred not to have crowds. And then of course you have to cook everything on fire, you need to find some water, and you have to carry all your stuff with you. So that was way more challenging. But that was way nicer way to spend vacation, because you away from the crowds, you see stars at night. But the main challenge, if you do that, staying somewhere far away in a tent, since the Crimea, it's a border, because besides, after that, it's just Black Sea, and then you got Turkey and other countries. There will be border patrols walking the beaches, and also there'll be border patrols boats. So if you have too much bright of the campfires, they might tell you to extinguish it, or they might challenge you and ask you for papers. So that could be, you can get harassed by the border patrols because you're technically right on the border of the Soviet Union, being in Crimea. Also, when people come to Crimea from northern Russia, northern Ukraine, just like it happens a lot of times when you go down to Mexico. I never did yet, but I heard stories that quite often you can catch like bad diarrhea when you drink local water, if you don't drink bottled water. And of course, we didn't have bottled water in the Soviet Union. So that was a popular thing, that most of the time you arrive to Crimea and you have a horrible diarrhea for 2-3 days. Then your body kind of builds immunity and you're doing fine for the rest of the time. So you burn up to crisp, that you look like a boiled crawfish, and you have a horrible diarrhea. So that's usually how you start your vacation in Crimea. And then you start enjoying it a little bit later. Another problem, with the staying in Crimea is that all the plumbing, so forgot the word, trying to remember, but anyways, when you flush the toilet, it would say that all the plumbing would be just discharged straight into the Black Sea. So they will have a common line, and then maybe go, I don't know, like several hundred feet underwater. This pipe goes straight into the sea, and that's what it gets discharged. All the crap, everything will be discharged straight to the sea. No processing, no cleaning, nothing. And then, of course, if the wind blows specific way, all that crap will float back towards the beach, and then you have all this giant colony of Soviet people vacation on the beach, and they have to swim among the brown stuff in the water. So that was happening quite often too. And another thing, of course, you do when you at the beach at the Black Sea, you'll have your picture taken of you. People had cameras, but not many. I personally bought my first film camera when I went to college, so my family never had a camera. A lot of pictures that I show you guys of my family was actually taken by my cousin and my uncle. They always had camera. So there'll be photographers that will take picture of you and develop and print. And, so that was another, like this underground private enterprise is taking a picture of people, and they will have little setups. Like I have a photo of me in this little toy boat. And I just posted recently a picture on YouTube in my community when I'm staying on the rock in Yevpatoria. So it was also taken by the professional photographer, and then he prints the pictures and sells, for a ruble or two. So that was another private enterprise going on, is taking photos of the people on the beach. Okay, and this is the end of my story about spending vacation in Soviet Union wildland style. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please don't forget to put the like. And I always enjoy your comments. So if you have any questions or you want to share your memories about having some unusual vacation in an unusual spot, please comment under this video. And I have one more video about Soviet vacation coming up. It's about traveling to the other countries. So that'll be the final part, Soviet vacation number 5. And maybe sometimes later I'll tell you my own experience of traveling in 1977 to Crimea with my mother. It's a pretty good story, but I don't want to overload you guys since my videos are so long and boring. We continue grinding through the topic of Soviet vacation, and today we'll talk about traveling abroad or overseas. There was hardly any overseas traveling, but Soviet people travel as a tourist to the other countries, mostly from the so-called socialist camp and sometimes to the capitalistic camp. So today's topic is traveling abroad in Soviet Union. Right away, I need to announce that I never ever traveled abroad in the Soviet Union. The very first time I left, at that time that was independent Ukraine, was 1992, I believe, and I was smuggling vodka to Poland. So that's a different story though. So I never traveled, my family never traveled, and actually I don't know anyone in my circle of friends that anyone actually went to the other country for vacation. So you just need to keep that in mind. So all this information they're gonna present is pretty much my search. There's things I talk to my friends. So this is the information I know. Personally, I never traveled to the other country while living in the Soviet Union. It seemed as during the Stalin regime, there was hardly anyone going to the other countries as a tourist. It was maybe like if you've been sent from the factory to learn about some processes in the factories, but otherwise for just a vacation, no one was going. And only in 1958 there was Sputnik, which is interesting because my pen name is Sputnikov. And Sputnik, you probably know if you're interested in Soviet Union, it was the name of the first Soviet satellite, which is kind of what it means. We call satellite Sputniks. So there was a youth travel agency organized in 1958, and it was named Sputnik, and that was to provide opportunities for Soviet youth to travel as exchange kind of program to other countries. And around that time in 1955-58, only about 2,100 Soviet people traveled abroad, and the population, I believe, was around 200 million or 250 million. So in 1955 was 2,100 people traveled as tourists. In 1990, so about 40 years later, 2.2 million. So that was quite a change, was gradual increase of people traveling to the other countries. So once again, I want to remind you some key words in Russian language that will kind of help you to understand the whole situation with traveling. We already talked about Puchovka. Some subscribers helped me with translation. It's correctly to translate will be travel voucher. So you purchase travel voucher, you purchase Puchovka, and it gives you the right to go to some vacation spot and stay there for 10, 20 days, whatever, have meals provided. So Puchovka also needed to go to the other country. Same thing, you need to get it and then purchase it, and then you travel with that Puchovka for 10 days or 15 days to Bulgaria or Yugoslavia or some other country. So Puchovka still needed for traveling overseas. And as you can imagine, there was quite a shortage of Puchovkas, even traveling in Soviet Union by itself. So of course, traveling to the other countries was even more scarce. So it was hard. You can't just go to travel agencies. In fact, we never had like travel agency that you can just walk in and you have the options. Okay, you can buy Puchovka to Bulgaria, you can buy Puchovka to Crimea. Everything was going through distribution, or we call it распределение. So, you know, for example, you have 5,000 Puchovkas to Bulgaria, then they split them between Soviet republics. So, for example, they will have 1,000, for example, Puchovkas assigned to Ukraine. So then in Ukraine, officials will split, okay, we got, 10 regions, so every region will get 50 and Kyiv will get more, and then it goes down the chain. So then eventually it will get to some factory that say, hey, we have 2 Puchovkas to Bulgaria, we need to give it to the best workers at our factory. So that's how распределение or Puchovka distribution worked in Soviet Union. And of course, Soviet people were still humans with their human weaknesses, and so you won't be just like a fair distribution of Puchovkas. When you have a really high demand and you can't jack up the price to reflect on your supply, you just need to know the right people so you can get your hands on this Puchovka. And as I mentioned before, hardly anyone will say, oh, look, I bought Puchovka to Bulgaria. No, I got Puchovka to Bulgaria. So you actually had to know the people that will help you to get that Puchovka. So now we're talking about another super important word in the Soviet Russian language is blood. Now you need to be careful with word blood and word блядь. They sound really similar for foreigners and they say it really similar, but it's a huge difference. Blood is pretty much your connections, your position in society in Soviet Union. So they say, hey, he got it by blood. So he knows the right people and he managed to get something, refrigerator or Puchovka, something else. Блядь, it's the Russian word for like whore or slut. And it's a really bad word as people use for cursing. If they trip or they get mad, they will say, oh, блядь. People who play World of Tanks, they probably caught it quite often. The Russian players will be yelling that, блядь, or suka блядь, which means, I apologize, bitch whore. So this is the word that you don't want to use, but blood was a really important word in the Soviet Russian language. Okay, so since we kind of laid the foundation about traveling abroad, now we can get a little bit into details. The major difference between traveling, like Americans do or Europeans versus how the Soviets used to travel. A Soviet person couldn't travel on his own or with your family. You couldn't just buy Puchovka and you take your wife and the kids and you go to Bulgaria or go to Eastern Germany. That was not allowed. The only way Soviet people traveled, they traveled in groups. Usually the size of the group would be between 20 to 35 people. And sometimes, usually it would be like from the same area. So you have people who live, for example, in Kiev. So several factories, they each provide 2-3 people. They bundle them all in one big group. So there'll be a group from Kiev, from different factories, and they travel together. You always have a group leader. So there'll be a guy who already may be experienced, who traveled before. He should be probably a communist. And he will be like watching over the whole group. Then you probably have another 3-4 people to help him. So they also should be probably communist or young komsomolets. So they also be like ideologically, morally strong people. So help to herd the crew. And it's possibility that there'll be so-called babysitter, nyanka in Russian. So there'll be a KGB person which will supervise everyone, including the group leader. So now we encountered another very important Soviet Russian word, zayavka. So this is like, you can translate as a request. So since everything was decided by bureaucracy in Soviet Union, everything was decided through распределение, distribution, in order to get something, some kind of benefits, housing, whatever, quite often Soviet people had to write zayavka, like request, hey, my family, we just had a 3rd kid, so now we're qualified to get an apartment, skipping the waiting list, so we can get it вне очереди, without waiting, so you write zayavka for that. Or, I have a health conditions due to my work, I'm writing zayavka to get a Puchovka to some kind of spa to restore my health. So a lot of things were pushed through using zayavka. So you write zayavka request that you want to travel, then we go into характеристика. Another huge word in Soviet Russian is характеристика, which you can translate as correction or outline. So this is what your boss will do, or your local labor union leader. They'll write your характеристика, your outline, what kind of person you are. So usually be the description that this person, maybe even mention where you were born and what kind of your origin. So you like from the peasant family or from workers, then you have a certain degree in education, then you work at this factory for so many years and you proved yourself as a valuable person and a worker, that you always exceed the quotas for production, that you never, acting weird, you don't come to work drunk, you respect your co-workers and the management. So this will be the long, like a printout signed by your boss at the factory, by labor leader, by local communist leader. So this is what you also needed as a part of getting permission to travel overseas, характеристика. In addition, if you were planning to travel to not a socialist scam country, so Germany, Western Germany, Egypt, India, then you needed to fill out a separate piece of paper called Anketa Turista, tourist questionnaire. So there's another important word in a Soviet Russian is Anketa. This is where you fill the answer the questions in the form that they needed to be answered prior being approved for traveling in this case. So, and as I said, if the countries will be not a part of SEV, which is like the Union of Economical Self-Help, there was Hungary, Poland, Eastern Germany, and so Bulgaria. If you go to capitalistic countries, you also need to fill this anketa. And right now we'll go through the questions that you're supposed to answer in Anketa Turista that goes overseas. Okay, so here we're looking at the Anketa Turista, the tourist questionnaire for the person traveling overseas. First question, of course, it's your last name and your first name and father's name, отчество, which we used. Second question, did you ever change your last name or first name? And where, when, and why? Third question is your date of birth and place of birth. Number 4 is your nationality. Number 5 is your партийность. So do you belong to the party? And of course, in this will be an answer yes, and it automatically means you're a member of Communist Party, or no. Then you just беспартийный, you have no party alliance. There was no other options of being communist member or member of Communist Party or no member whatsoever. Number 6 is your education, what college or institute or university you finished and when. Number 7, did you get any взыскания? So if you did anything bad, you might get so-called взыскания, so you got lowered in your during your career climb, you might get lower position or something like that. So if you did, then why, when, what did you do, and stuff like that. Question number 8, do you speak any foreign languages and which ones? There's another thing I'll talk about more about later, that Soviet government didn't really like people with knowledge of foreign languages to travel to those countries, because then you can get information directly instead of through their own translator. So interesting question number 8. What foreign languages can you speak? Number 9. Have you ever, you or your relatives were criminally charged? If yes, of course, then when and what for what? Number 10. Have you been overseas already before, when, where, and what was your purpose of traveling overseas? So there's another question, number 10. Have you been there before? And we're going to touch that later, because there were some unofficial limits how often they will allow you to go overseas. And number 11 is a totally amazing Soviet question. Do you have relatives abroad? Where, from what time, and what do they do? And actually you need to supply their name, last name, and how they're related to you. So this is the official Anketa Turista tourist questionnaire if you wanted to go overseas into not socialist countries, so capitalistic countries or something like that. So as you see, if you want to travel overseas abroad, it's a very painful process. It was a very painful process, and we didn't finish it yet. So this is, you got your anketa filled up, you got your характеристика, outline of your personality done by your local management, you got your own request. So now if you approve at your local level, like at your factory, all those papers move up next to the local Communist Party committee. So there'll be a Communist Party committee that looking at those applications in your town or in your region. After that, it moves up again, and that's why it goes to actually the whole region or right into Moscow. That has a regional committee of Communist Party that looks at the applications, and who's going to be in that commission? KGB representative, there'll be union, party leaders, and so on. So that was a special commission just to look at the applications for people who want to travel abroad. And so that's your final decision that they're going to approve you or not. And some people won't be approved. If they work at some factory that has a sensitive information or relates to military whatsoever, there's a good chance they won't let you go, or you possess some state secrets, or maybe just not trustworthy person, you can get rejected. What I found was not a high percentage of people who got rejected, because I assume the filtration system would reject those people earlier. So by the time it goes up to the original committee, that will be only like the best of the best people that waiting for approval. And only after all this, you have the right to apply for the passport to travel overseas. So in Soviet Union, you had an inside passport. So that's one you use for your ID. We couldn't use driver's license, stuff like that. It always was official Soviet Union passport. So you're a citizen of Soviet Union. But if you travel overseas, and just like in America, you have a passport for traveling abroad, so that's a different one. And only after all these approvals and that you actually manage to hang on some Puchovka, some travel voucher, then you can apply and get a passport. So this is what kind of steps you had to go through in order to get yourself as a tourist and go somewhere to see other countries. Now you may ask a question, why in hell Soviet government will go through all this pain and will take its citizens through all this torture just because they wanted to travel overseas? Will be much easier probably just not to let anyone travel. So we're gonna talk about it in my next video. I thought I might just do one video, cover all this topic, but it's quite a few things to talk about it. So we're gonna talk in our next video about why and what was the ideal Soviet tourist and other things, cost and different trips. We're gonna cover it in our next video. Well, thank you for watching. As always, please don't forget to like this video. Please be advised. Be ready for another very long and very boring video from my show. Okay, so we're back and we're gonna talk again about Soviet vacation. This is video number 6 and we still just barely touched the surface about this. I think it's quite an interesting topic, but if you're not interested, maybe it will help you to have a nice big shot of vodka, and then we carry on talking about how the Soviet people spend their time on vacation. So the last video I finished with the question that I was trying to find the answer. Why, oh why, Soviet government decided to open the doors. I won't say even open, maybe like just a tiny squeeze of the push. I don't know how to even say it. To let some selected Soviet people to leave the country and experience life on the other side of the border. My answers for the question why will be, maybe first one will be KGB. They needed some other channels of sending their agents to the other countries for whatever reasons. So there is one possibility. Another possibility, maybe that's top Soviet officials' wives or girlfriends were complaining that how come we are on the top of the, social ladder of the Soviet Union, but I'm not allowed to go and see Paris, and I can't ever see other countries, but probably Paris will be first on the list for any Soviet woman. So that's kind of answers I found for the question why Soviet government decided to let their people out as a tourist. Another idea, and that's what official line was apparently, that Soviet government decided to start a different type of tourism for their people, so-called social tourism, which means you send your people to the other countries where they're gonna promote the socialism achievements, and they're gonna show local people, how happy Soviet people are, and they're gonna visit factories, museums, and so on. So that was an interesting part. We're gonna talk briefly about it later, that wasn't just visiting sites, seeing some interesting places like Eiffel Tower or something like that. Part of the this package Puchovka was Actually, you visit factories, you visit specific museums in the countries that you go see. So once again, Soviet tourists were selected, and pretty intensely selected. They had to be showing that they are morally and politically reliable. They're generally a good person and hard worker. And a good person, for example, meant that you are not a divorcee, that you're a married person, and they will never send both wife and husband on a trip. There will be only like husband goes or wife goes, maybe for the reason that you always have reasons to come back. And another interesting detail, they prefer people without any visible physical disabilities. This is pretty hardcore, I think. So no handicapped people were allowed to go to other countries as tourists, because then you kind of like, you want to show that all Soviet people are, you know, kind of good looking, without limping, without missing limbs or eyes. So there's the other part which I found really interesting, that they were not allowing people with visible physical disabilities to travel as a tourist to the other countries. So let's go through the next stage. So after you pass the initial filtering system, which we already discussed in the previous videos, you qualified, you purchased Puchovka, and now prices were also different. Average price to the socialist countries in Europe were around 200 rubles, which is, you know, it's pretty pricey if you think that you make about 130 rubles a month and you have to pay 200 rubles for like 14 days of traveling. So I think it's pretty pricey. For example, in 1962, Puchovka to Czechoslovakia for 14 days, which is 2 weeks, the cost was 110 rubles plus a trip, and a trip was around 60 rubles for a train, so you're pushing it, you know, towards 200 rubles. So it wasn't that cheap. The most expensive was the cruise around Europe. That was between 500 to 800 rubles, so that's, you're talking about 6 months worth of your salary to have around the Europe cruise on the liner Shota Rustaveli. I usually times 10, so that's about $8,000 if you are earning around $1,300 a month. If you're talking about $2,000 a month, so that's maybe around $10,000 in kind of comparing with what Americans earn. So pretty expensive. So you're a lucky guy, you passed the filtering system, you got qualified, approved, you purchased your Puchovka, you had enough money saved. The next step was group briefing. So as I mentioned, Soviet tourists never traveled alone. It was always in a group, maybe between 20 to 30 people. And then this group, for example, if they go to East Germany or Bulgaria or whatever, that group will be briefed by a region's union representatives along with in-tourist representatives. So in-tourist was the Soviet travel kind of like agency. So these people will come to your town where that group is, and they will talk to you about how to behave while you're abroad. They kind of teach you about different manners that maybe you're not familiar. And they also will work with you, kind of guide you how to answer questions about life in Soviet Union. That's, I'm not joking. There was actually a brochure published in 1977 called USSR 100 questions and answers. So there was a brochure that you can take along with you that helps you to find the answers to sometimes maybe uncomfortable questions about Soviet Union. Life in Soviet Union, for example, like why Soviet TVs are 10 times heavier than Japanese-made TVs, and some other questions. So that brochure was published year after year, and that was to help Soviet tourists to answer some questions about life in the USSR. So as I mentioned in the beginning, there was a so-called social tourism. So people had to visit, they had no choice. different factories, collective farms, and stuff like that. For example, one group from Perm, which is Siberia, in 1959, when they went to Hungary, they not only visited Budapest, the capital of the country, as well as some ancient monasteries. They also visited steelmaking factories in the brand new city of Stalinvaros, and also the city town of Chapel. Then, after a 3-day rest on the Lake Balaton in a spa called Balaton Feldvar, they also visited agriculture cooperative in town of Eger. And of course, it's when you go to the factory, you'll have some meal and you meet local workers and kind of intermingle and talk about things. And quite often it was all official made. Then you come out of the bus, there'll be some orchestra and people have flowers for you. Then they have an exchange of souvenirs and stuff like that. I also found mentioning then when they had actually Puchovka to Egypt, and a part of the visit in Egypt, besides seeing the pyramids, they also would go and visit hydro plant Assuansk. I'm not sure how to properly say it in English, but the Soviet Union helped to build a big hydro plant in Egypt. It's called Assuan hydro plant, and that was you have to visit that place if you visit Egypt. And I'm not sure if I would be interested, like if I work in a coal mine and I have my vacation and I go, like I got lucky and I go over to the other country. I don't know if I want to visit coal mine there or the factory that makes same stuff as I make back home. You know, I would like to have a vacation. There's one thing if they will send me as a, like, to exchange experiences, learn something new, and they pay me to visit some other country and the factory, they will be fine with me. But I'm not sure if I would personally like to visit factories or coal mines on my personal time, on my vacation that I had to pay for. There's a list of several other locations that people had to visit in the different countries. Quite often they'll be related to the international communist movement, the history of it. So for example, in Prague, the Soviet tourist will visit the Museum of Lenin. Same, they will visit apartment museum of Vladimir Lenin in Paris, and as well as in Tampere, which is Finland. If they go to East Germany, they might visit the Museum of Dimitrov in Leipzig, and as well as the original typographia, so the place when they print newspapers. They printed newspaper Iskra, the Sparkle, in Leipzig in Germany. So that will be place you would visit if you go to East Germany. Also, people would visit concentration camps like Buchenwald in Eastern Germany, Mauthausen in Austria, Oswiecim in Poland. So that would be kind of thing you had to visit. If you got lucky and you go to London, then you will visit the grave of Karl Marx. If you are in Berlin, you must go to Treptow Park, the big monument for the fallen Soviet soldiers, as well as another monument in Prague, Olshan Cemetery for the fallen Soviet soldiers. In Paris, there will be also some graves there that you visit. And some people ask me about Cuba. Yes, we had Puchovkas to Cuba also. I don't think those were really popular. Because the flying to Cuba is really expensive. But if you visited Cuba, then you go and you visit memorial for the Soviet soldiers, which would have called them like international soldiers in Havana. So that's a part that you are required to do while you're on vacation. You visit all these places in different countries. Okay, so now when you have your Puchovka, you had your lecture done about how to behave in the other country, and they will teach you how to answer all these sneaky questions about the life in Soviet Union. Like, for example, why do you have only one political party in the Soviet Union? Or how come that your country is the biggest country in the world, but you have to purchase grain to feed your people? With Puchovka, then you were allowed to apply and to receive a passport for traveling abroad. And just like in the United States, you need a special passport to travel overseas. You had inside passport, where we talked about it, and then you have so-called Загранпаспорт. And that was the only document you were allowed to take along with you. You weren't allowed to take your party ticket if you're a member of Communist Party. Neither you could take your union ticket. We call it ticket, but it's like ID. So there'll be party ID, labor union ID. Not a single document was allowed to bring along except your passport for traveling abroad. And actually your inside passport, Soviet passport, would be confiscated, not confiscated, but taken by local militia, which is like a cops, police. They'll keep your passport for the time while you're traveling. So that's very interesting detail too. Then came the question what to do with money. To give you rough ideas, in late 1960s, people were making, like if you work in a drugstore, like a pharmaceutical person, you make around between 70 to 100 rubles a month. As accountant, same, between 70 to 100 rubles. We're talking about 60s, later was a little bit up. People who load and unload trucks in the grocery stores were making between 90 and 150. Doctors between 125 to 177 rubles. So this is one thing about life in Soviet Union. Pretty much almost everyone was making about the same, regardless you're a doctor or the person who loads the trucks at the grocery store. But still, no matter how much rubles you earn in Soviet Union, you need a different currency if you go to India or if you go to Czechoslovakia or you go to Bulgaria. Average, you are allowed to purchase around $30 of local currency, so about 27 rubles. So they will let you to have it at exchange, and then you also allowed to take along with you another 30 rubles, just in case. You can exchange them there at the local bank. And another kind of limitation, that with the agreement, the socialist country banks were allowed only to take 10 ruble bills from the tourists. So if you try to sneak more money to exchange for local currency, then you try to take big bills like 50 ruble bills, local banks won't exchange it. They only were using for exchange 10 ruble bills. And if you have any extra currency, you had to exchange it back to rubles, because it was strictly forbidden to bring any foreign currency back into the USSR by private people. So it seems like they was calculated that Soviet tourists need around $2 per day for his time away while he's vacationing in a different country. There were limits of what things you could bring along. For example, you just say you should look good and have a clothes that matches the climate in the country. And if you go out the borders of the Soviet Union, you are allowed to bring along only one radio receiver to listen to radio, only one camera. We're talking at the time, of course, it was film cameras, only 2 watches, a couple of souvenirs, only 1 golden ring, only 1 golden bracelet, only 1 pair of your glasses if they have a golden frame, and no more than 400 grams of jewelry made out of silver. So that was a pretty strict limits of what kind of stuff you can take along, because what was happening, since people couldn't bring currency, they were trying to take along as many things as possible to trade in, to sell in the country, so they can buy other stuff to bring back. We'll talk about it in our next video, but a lot of times people will bring the cameras, like a Zenit brand was a really nice cameras, and they would sell it in Bulgaria or Hungary, and then use the money to buy things they wanted to bring back to the Soviet Union, because for $2 a day, there's really not much you could buy to bring home. And let's talk a little bit about the cost of Puchovka. as I mentioned, people were making roughly, I would say, around 100-150 rubles a month. And Puchovka is without trip. So trip will add another 70 rubles. So as I mentioned earlier, in 1962, 14 days in Czechoslovakia will cost you 110 rubles plus the trip, around 60 rubles. And then you buy a currency for 27 rubles. So total of 197 rubles. Romania, Bulgaria will be 150 rubles. Then trip. 15-day trip to India in 1962 was 430 rubles. 9 days in Finland, 134 rubles from Leningrad. And as I said, cruise around Europe on a cruise ship was between 500 to 800 rubles. And they also had a trip, wow, I didn't know about it, but around Western Africa, it was also between 600 to 827 rubles, plus you have to get yourself to Odessa, port of Odessa, and then you can buy a currency worth of 24 rubles. So that was the cost of Puchovka, so not cheap, pretty pricey. Apparently they even had cruises around Japan in 1972. In 1969 you could visit Tunisia, Algeria, and Cuba. In 1961 was actually a trip around different African countries, so there was quite a few, but pretty pricey. Okay, so this is another video, long and boring one about Soviet people traveling to the other countries. In my next video, we're gonna look at some trips to Bulgaria, which was one of the most popular destinations. I have one friend of mine give me his recollections. He wrote me a little story about his trip to Bulgaria, so we'll look at that, and we'll see what we're going to learn from it. Thank you once again for watching my channel. As always, don't forget to put likes. We continue our topic about vacation in the USSR, and more specifically, traveling abroad. We covered the topic, but it's still several things I would like to tell you about, and today is actually a story about one of my friends who managed to travel with his family to Bulgaria. So I thought it'll be interesting for you to learn from the actual person who went to the other country, because as I mentioned before, I don't know anyone from my circle of friends and family back in Kiev that went overseas. I know two guys in my class who were in Germany, but not because they traveled as a tourist, but because their fathers were military officers and they were stationed in Eastern Germany, of course, GDR, German Democratic Republic. So they lived there for several years. Otherwise, I don't know anyone who managed to get Puchovka. You should know that word by now, the travel voucher, and go somewhere else except Crimea, the Black Sea area. So in this email, my friend Rodion, he mentions that it was really hard to get any Puchovka going to other countries, even Bulgaria. And you should have connections. As another word you should know by now, you should have blood. And I said most of the time there was like communist party members, like in the management, and also people who worked in retail. You should also know by now that if you work in retail and you had access to goods, there'll be people who need the goods. And if you need Puchovka, you can cut the agreement like, hey, I'll help you to get a refrigerator without waiting if you can help me to get a Puchovka to Bulgaria. Another category of people in Soviet Union who could have a better access to Puchovkas were doctors, specifically gynecologists and dentists. That's the people that in exchange for providing good service, they might be able to get Puchovka from someone who has access to those. Same thing, Rodion mentions that he didn't know anyone among his friends or schoolmates who went to the other country for vacation, although his father, who had friends in among doctors, he heard that some people went as far as Egypt. I've mentioned that before, that there were actually Puchovkas to Egypt. But they got lucky, and they went in 1989 to Bulgaria. His father managed to get Puchovkas, and he actually used the word vybit, which is like hammered out. So he had to push really hard and pull the strings, and he finally managed to get Puchovka, which was quite pricey. So we're talking 1989. So this is the final years of the Soviet Union, and the prices changed quite a bit. So Puchovka for the family to Bulgaria was 1,000 rubles, which is a lot of money. But because you are a member of the labor union, you pay usually only about 30% of the cost. The rest is covered by a labor union. And this is the only thing I remember as a benefit of being a labor member of the labor union in Soviet Union. You have discounts for Puchovkas. Otherwise, you pay your dues, and usually labor union is always lined up with the management, because, you know, how can you fight communist leadership when you're a union member? You should be always on the same page. So Bulgaria was the most accessible destination in those years, and the most popular because it was south of Russia. So it was another like a vacation to the sunny, warm Black Sea. So similar to Crimea, but you go to the other country. So it was not, I would say, cheap 1,000 rubles. That's not cheap. But, you know, most people have said if they go on vacation, they wanted to go somewhere where they can get some nice tan. They want to get all crisped up and be red as the boiled crawfish and get some diarrhea, as we talked about it before. But since the Bulgaria was very similar to Soviet Union, Bulgarian language is very similar. So after short practice, you can kind of understand Bulgarian. Most Bulgarians, they understood Russian really well. So that was easy for the Russian people from Russia to talk to locals. And since it was very similar, they had some red flags, you know, banners. It's just instead of Communist Party of Soviet Union banners, there was Communist Party of Bulgaria banners. So there was KPB instead of KPSS, like we say Soviet Union is as Soviet Sovietsky Soyuz will be KPCC kind of thing on the banners. So, and there was even a saying that Kurica не птица, Bulgaria не за граница, which actually you can translate in its rhymes as well, that chicken is not actually a bird, and Bulgaria is not actually going abroad. So this is what the saying was popular in the Soviet Union about people who said probably, well, I went abroad, and they're like, where did you go? I went to Bulgaria. Well, Bulgaria, you know, it's just like chicken is not exactly a bird, Bulgaria is not exactly going abroad. Okay, I need to be corrected. He went in 1987, so not 1989. So his whole family went, and he says we went as a group. So in their group, they had also a couple, older couple from Kazakhstan, along with their granddaughter. And prior to the trip to Bulgaria, they already had a trip to Yugoslavia. But the reason why they were getting access to Puchovkas is because they were famous sheep herders. So they had a big collective farm where they raised sheep, and they earned this Puchovka for doing some great work in sheep management. So as I said, it was pretty expensive. It was very hard to get. Like his father, Rodion's father, had to work really hard to get access to Puchovka. And we already talked about all the hoops that Soviet people had to jump through in order to get approved to be a tourist. And apparently kids, they also needed a special paperwork from school so in every class, you had a teacher who'd be like your lead teacher, so he's in charge of all class, классная руководительница, so it'll be like a class leader. So she's a teacher, so maybe she teaches math or any other science, but at the same time, her second kind of part job is she's in charge of specific class. She's a class leader, you know, she deals with parents and stuff like that. So a kid, if he goes to the other country, he'll need to get характеристика. So there's another word you need to learn which was big deal in Soviet Union, is характеристика. So it's like your personal character paper. So the teacher will write like he's a good pupil, he's polite, he nice kid. So the kid had to bring from school paperwork too to get approved to go with parents to the other country. Their group had a special meeting with people who instructed them how to behave in other country, and the kids had a separate instructions meeting, and that was more about that how they need to act, because they're gonna have official meeting with the young kids from Bulgaria. Also, they had so-called pioneers. I covered that topic in my videos earlier about the school in Soviet Union. So there was a planned meeting with Bulgarian pioneers, and our kids supposed to bring some souvenirs to exchange to, because it'll be official, kind of like a exchange of souvenirs between kids. And we already talked about Vysotsky, the famous Soviet bard singer, and he has a really good song dedicated for these instructions kind of thing for the tourists, and I'll put it in a link below this video. Alright, moving along. Also, Rodion mentions that at that time, so 1987, they actually increased amount of money you can exchange. Adult could exchange 500 rubles worth of into the local currency, which in Bulgaria is called leva, lev, like a lion, I guess. And a kid, they can use 250 rubles. They had a special rate for exchange, was 1-to-1, so you buy 1 lev with 1 ruble, and supposedly it was like a special good rate, but in fact, he said it was interesting, a lot of items were more expensive in Bulgaria comparing with the same items in Soviet Union. For example, he mentions Bulgarian. We had quite a few cigarettes from Bulgaria for sale in Soviet Union, and he said the pack of cigarettes called Phoenix were about 80 kopecks in Bulgaria versus 50 kopecks in Soviet Union. So it's kind of interesting that in Bulgaria, Bulgarian cigarettes were more expensive than Bulgarian cigarettes in Soviet Union. And of course, the Rodion, that friend of mine, he was a kid back then, but he remembers a trip to the shopping center in Bulgaria, and he said after his small town stores, to see the shopping area in Bulgaria was real shock, because there was so much stuff for sale, and he actually forced his parents, well, I guess he was more like a teenager, to buy some LPs of a modern talking band. So those were like in high demand in Soviet Union. The band was really popular. I think they started like in 1985, if I recall, modern talking from Germany. And you couldn't get the LPs of them in Soviet Union. They were really deficit. But he forced his parents back them to buy some in Bulgaria, and he brought them home. And he also remembers that he was really shocked to see all this alcohol and whiskeys. They went to the local so-called valutny magazine. There's a separate topic about stores which were selling stuff only for so-called hard currency, for foreign currency, so for dollars or British pounds or German Deutschmarks. Now, we had them in Soviet Union too, called Berezka. In Bulgaria, had a similar stores called Koryak, and that's where you can buy foreign goods for foreign currency. And of course, Soviet people didn't officially allow head currency, so there was stores for the foreigners. So he went to that store in Bulgaria, and he was shocked to see all that selection. And he said he remembers different like a candy in this giant metal boxes and a huge bottle of Scottish whiskey. And that's what the very first time he met someone foreign, there was a lady and a grandma with 2 kids, and they were speaking English. So that's the first time I met foreigner. That was in Bulgaria. And of course, when Soviet tourists traveled to the other country like Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, they discovered there was a huge price difference between similar items, or there would be goods that you couldn't get at all in Soviet Union. So that's when there'll be my next video about how people started smuggling money or goods while going on vacation in order to bring some stuff back and sell it for profit, or, keep it for themselves, like American Levi's jeans and other things. So this we'll cover in our next video, and that's quite a topic because I participated in the later movement. I technically was a tourist going to Poland, but in fact I was smuggling vodka for sale to Poland. So that will be my next video. I hope you enjoyed this one. Please don't forget to put like. And as always, thank you for support of my channel. I appreciate everyone who sent me some money on PayPal or supports me for Patreon. It's greatly appreciated because YouTube definitely doesn't pay much to produce the videos. Thank you so much. Today we're gonna finish our story about Soviet tourism, although there is so much more we can talk about it, but it's already video number 8, so I would like to just kind of wrap the things up and move, because there's way more topics that we can discuss in our videos about life in Soviet Union. So quick recapture, quick review our previous episodes. What did we learn about Soviet tourism and people spending their vacation going overseas and visiting other countries? First of all, Soviet people had to go through extensive vetting. They had to be chosen by being morally and politically reliable people. Soviet tourists always traveled in groups, usually about 20 to 35 people. You weren't allowed to travel to the other countries every single year. As I mentioned, it was really hard to get Puchovka, the travel voucher, to go to the other country, but some people had connections, had blood. We talked about that word too. So they could technically go every year, but usually there were limits. If you visited some kind of socialist country like Poland, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, then it's about 2-year gap between that visit and next visit. Now, if you went to capitalistic country like Germany, England, whatever, then it's usually 3 to 5 years waiting period, then they let you go to the other countries, capitalist countries again. And of course, if you didn't behave appropriately when you were in another country, then it will be duly written down, noted that, for example, the person expressed too much excitement about capitalistic way of life. They were claiming that it looks so much better to live in Germany, for example, that stores look nice and there's a lot of items, everything is clean. If you are too loud to express your excitement about other countries, then you can get in trouble and it will be you'll be banned from traveling abroad forever. While people were in other countries, they were supposed to always be in their groups as a general rule. Every group had their leader that'd be watching over the group, and if you went missing, it was a huge deal. Even if you fell behind your group, even 200-300 feet, that could be noted and says that you were trying to do something shady, or you were just acting appropriately. That can be for you, again, you'll be on the blacklist for not going again to the other countries. So Soviet tourists must stay in groups. And also there was always a big effort to minimize unauthorized contacts with local people. Another interesting detail that I didn't discuss yet is about Soviet government was working really hard to maintain the Soviet information bubble. So even if people went to the other countries, every hotel in the socialist countries like Bulgaria or Poland, so the hotels where the Soviet tourists will stop, they always would have a fresh Soviet newspapers delivered from the local embassy. So it was a big deal that Soviet people always had their newspapers and magazines. And speaking of the information bubble, I found this interesting story that in 1978, there was a really cool kind of cruise on a Karelia cruise ship, Soviet cruise ship. And that was a cruise around Europe. So people visited England, France, Italy, and other countries. And during that cruise, Soviet tourists on ship while en route from one country to another, they were playing over loudspeakers on the ship the Leonid Brezhnev book Tselina. You can translate like Virgin Lands. So there's the book that he actually didn't write. So journalists, shadow writers wrote the book based on his memories. So that book was played like book on tapes over the cruise ship speakers while people were traveling in the sea in other countries. And as well, they were translating also Soviet radio stations like news and stuff. As I mentioned, every group had its leader, and a group leader job was not only watching over the people, also to make sure they don't buy improper stuff and don't bring it back to Soviet Union. Any foreign printed materials were forbidden from bringing back, especially pornography magazines and Bibles. Big thing was about Bibles. I even remember when I was in school, we had kind of like a lecture that brought a guy who showed us this skinny tiny Bibles that people were smuggling, and it was like really bad thing. So there was Bibles printed, designed specifically to be smuggled into Soviet Union, and that was a big deal. Like, look, this is what capitalist enemies do. They bring these Bibles into our country. So there was a big deal about not allowing Soviet tourists to bring any printed materials from other countries. Now we're going to our main topic of this video, the smuggling goods back into to the Soviet Union. And this is kind of an interesting thing because, you know, the main thing about Soviet Union and the whole idea was to replace market economy with central planning economy. And that's what happened. We had deficit. I mentioned that word many times, and my viewers already noticed that we had shortage of a lot of things. Like stores were quite empty. There's a lot of things you had to wait to be on the waiting list for months or years. Like Soviet cars, you could wait up to 9 years to purchase a car, even if it was so expensive. So when the Soviet tourists went to other countries, especially like Yugoslavia or capitalistic countries like Germany, they saw stores full of these all desirable items like shoes, clothing, electronics, watches, cosmetics, perfumes, even chewing gum and condoms. So they want to buy it and bring it home. But we already talked about it, that there was a limit how much money you can bring with you. In like 60s and early 70s, the limit was like $32 you were allowed to purchase. It was illegal to own foreign currency in Soviet Union, and the only way you could buy it is when you had a Puchovka, when you had a travel voucher to go to the other country. So what many people tried to do is to bring some extra items with them so they can sell them, like in Yugoslavia, and use the money to buy desired goods. And of course, the Soviet government knew about that too, so there were quite a strict limits how much stuff you could bring along with yourself. For example, you were allowed to bring only one radio receiver, like only one film camera, only 2 watches, only 1 golden ring, only 1 golden chain, and stuff like that. So they were actually checking the items that you take along with you. And quite a few items were popular in Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, like for example, Soviet camera Zenit, a very popular item. So that's what people would, they'll bring a camera, you know, because you're tourists, you're taking pictures. So they'll buy a camera, a brand new camera, and they take it with them to sell, and then use the money to buy something to bring back to the Soviet Union. Many people were bringing vodka, because, you know, Russian vodka was always in demand, and the limit was 2 bottles per person. So people would try to maybe hide another extra bottle. Also, they'll try to hide somewhere rubles, so maybe they can trade for the local currency over there in the country. With vodka was pretty funny because quite often those bottles didn't make it to the final destination. People just being on a train and being bored, so they just pop the bottle open and start drinking, get drunk, and there'll be like reports that some tourist got too drunk and fell off the second level bunk in a train and it got hurt. So there was funny stories like that. Or for example, while carrying luggage, the bottle broke inside of the luggage, and liquid damaged the passport, washing all the stamps. So there will be accidents like that. There was a report from one of the group leaders in 1969 that when the group arrived to Czech Republic, the personnel of the hotel approached the Soviet tourists right away and offered to purchase their vodka, because Russians always sell vodka. So they already knew that there will be vodka with the Soviet tourists. So it's interesting to watch how, you have this planned economy, but the sneaky market economy always work in the background. That black market, people still will find a way to do something so they can purchase things they really want. And then, of course, people will file the claim that they lost their camera or their camera got stolen, but apparently a guy would sell the camera to get money to purchase something else. One of the worst things that the Soviet tourists could do while being in another country is go on your own for a walk or whatever. That was a big deal, that you're not allowed to go on your own anywhere. And if it happened, then of course a leader of the group can get in trouble, and they would had to knock at night. They'll go and they check, make sure that everyone stays in their room and not sneaking out to be on the streets. And once again, there was really almost dumb laws about, for example, apparently in Soviet Union, we had a shortage of stuff for knitting. So you can knit a sweater or whatever. And I'm not sure if I can say that word correctly in English, but it's mohair. So this type was, quite a few of those things were available in Yugoslavia. So the Soviet ladies really wanted to buy, but it was illegal you weren't allowed to bring mohair stuff back. So what the ladies did, they will purchase that mohair and knit right away while they're on a trip. And they're reunion, they'll knit things quickly, like blankets, whatever really basic, really quick work you can do, and then bring back as items. So you're not allowed to bring it on a roll, but they'll quickly knead the item out of it like a blanket and then smuggle back home. Then they take it apart back at their apartment, run through the steamer to get them straight again, and then they make whatever they want or sell it. And from the middle of 1970s till beginning of the 80s, the huge thing is to bring jeans, especially Levi's or some Italian brands. That were in high demand back in Soviet Union. So you could sell easily a pair of jeans for 100 rubles, or Levi's, I believe the price was going all the way as high as 300 rubles per pair. So 2 monthly salaries people were willing to pay for a pair of American Levi's. And that would pay for your trip. So that's what people would do. They'll try to smuggle some money or trade their goods for money or anything else. And then they bring jeans back to their hometown and sell it. And it will pay off for their trip. And of course, there were limits. You were allowed to bring only one pair of jeans or only one jean jacket. So of course people would buy sizes from normal size and then size it up, and they put 2-3 pairs of jeans on themselves to smuggle them back into the country. So by the beginning of 80s, middle of 1980s, pretty much a lot of people knew that there were goods in other countries that if you buy them there, bring back home, you can sell them and make huge profit. And this is a big deal because after Soviet Union collapsed and borders border control got laxed, that was one thing that a lot of people made their initial initial capital. They were traveling as a tourist in parentheses to China, to Poland, to other countries, to Turkey. A lot of people were going to Turkey. And they'll bring some goods with them to sell in Turkey, then turn around, purchase jeans, leather jackets, and bring them back to Ukraine or Russia and sell them there on the bazaar and make good profit, turn around, buy more stuff, take it to Turkey, sell there at the market, turn around, buy stuff. And that was the huge, we'll talk about it later, but that's how a lot of people made their initial money and they started businesses, being a so-called Chilnok shuttle. So people were just basically traveling non-stop to, as I said, Turkey or China, and as hauling big bags to Turkey, then spending a week or so at the bazaar, the local market, selling it all, then turning around, buying stuff and taking it back home, staying at the bazaar, selling it, turning around. So that was the word chelnok, shuttle, because you constantly shuttle between two countries, bringing goods back and forth. So it started all back in 70s and 80s with the Soviet tourists, and then it's really exploded after the collapse of Soviet Union. It became this business tourism, shuttle tourism, when people were just constantly traveling, but in real reason they were just earning money by shuttling goods between countries. Okay, so it was my final story about Soviet tourism and traveling abroad. I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, don't forget to put likes and share with your friends. I still didn't tell you the story about my personal experience traveling to Black Sea and Azov Sea, so maybe we'll do it a little bit later, because there's other topics I would like to cover. And thank you so much for my viewers who support me with patreon.com. I really appreciate your support, and we'll talk to you soon. До свидания.